Have you ever wondered why dreams only visit us when we close our eyes and drift into sleep? What is it about the state of sleep that unlocks this vivid, sometimes strange, and deeply personal world of images and emotions? Today, let's dive into the neuroscience behind dreams, uncovering why dreams come precisely when we sleep and what purpose they serve in our brain's incredible architecture. When we think about sleep, it might seem like a simple, passive state, just the body resting while the brain turns off. But in reality, sleep is a highly dynamic process involving profound shifts in brain activity, chemistry, and function. The transition from wakefulness to sleep is like passing through a gateway, a transformation that changes how your brain processes information and sets the stage for dreaming. During wakefulness, the brain is constantly engaged with the outside world. Sensory organs, your eyes, ears, skin, nose, and tongue continuously gather data about your environment. This sensory information floods into your brain, where different regions rapidly interpret it to guide your thoughts and movements and decisions. The cerebral cortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, plays a critical role in attention, planning, and executive function, all tightly linked to sensory input and environmental demands. When neurons are firing in complex patterns, neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin modulate your mood and alertness, and your brain's networks are highly synchronized to manage ongoing tasks. But the moment you begin to fall asleep, this entire system starts to change. The brain gradually disengages from processing external stimuli. Sensory input is no longer prioritized. The gates that let information flow from the senses into the brain begin to close. This shift is orchestrated by specialized brain regions, including the hypothalamus, thalamus, and brainstem, which coordinate the onset of sleep and regulate its stages. One critical player in this process is the thalamus, often described as the brain's relay station. So during wakefulness, the thalamus passes along incoming sensory signals to the cerebral cortex, helping you remain aware of your surroundings. But as you enter sleep, especially non-REM sleep, the thalamus starts to block or gate these signals, reducing the cortical processing of sensory input. This gating mechanism is essential. It prevents the brain from being distracted by noise, light, or other external cues, allowing it to enter a state focused inward rather than outward. Along with reduced sensory input, the brain's electrical activity begins to change. Wakefulness is marked by fast, desynchronized brain waves known as beta and gamma rhythms that reflect active thinking and sensory processing. As you move into deeper stages of sleep, brain waves slow down into alpha, theta, and eventually delta waves, which are large, slow oscillations. This slowing indicates a fundamental reorganization of neural activity. The brain becomes less reactive to external stimuli and more engaged in internal processes. At the chemical level, neurotransmitter levels shift dramatically. During wakefulness, neuromodulators like norepinephrine and serotonin keep the brain alert and responsive. But as sleep deepens, the levels of these neurotransmitters fall, allowing the brain to enter a unique neurochemical environment that supports restorative functions. Meanwhile, acetylcholine, which is involved in attention and memory during wakefulness, behaves differently across sleep stages. In REM sleep, acetylcholine levels rise again, helping generate the vivid, complex experiences we call dreams. This shifting brain state during sleep creates an environment in which the brain can engage in processes that are impossible or inefficient during wakefulness. Without the constant barrage of sensory input, the brain turns inward, activating circuits involved in memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and creative problem solving. This inward focus is what allows dreams to occur. Dreams are essentially generated internally by the brain, simulating experiences without relying on external information. One of the most fascinating features of the human sleep cycle is the presence of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is the primary stage during which most vivid dreaming occurs. REM sleep is a unique and highly active state of the brain, despite the body appearing completely still. In fact, if we were to look at brain scans during REM sleep, the level of neural activity resembles that of being awakened in some regions, such as the visual cortex and the limbic system. The activity may even be more intense than during waking hours. This paradoxical combination, intense brain activity coupled with muscle paralysis, is what makes REM sleep so intriguing and crucial to our understanding of dreams. During a typical night, we cycle through different stages of sleep approximately every 90 minutes, and REM sleep becomes progressively longer with each cycle. Early in the night, REM stages may last just a few minutes, but later in the night, they can extend to 30 minutes or more. This is significant because it means the longest, most elaborate dreams often happen in the early morning hours, just before we wake. During REM sleep, the brain's neurochemical environment shifts in a very specific way. Levels of norepinephrine and serotonin, neurotransmitters associated with alertness, stress response, and logical thinking, drop dramatically. This unique neurochemical profile enables the generation of dreams that are often emotional, bizarre, and creatively uninhibited. One of the hallmark features of REM sleep is the activation of the pons, a structure in the brainstem that initiates REM-related processes. The pons sends signals to the thalamus, which in turn communicates with the visual cortex and other sensory areas, generating vivid imagery. Simultaneously, the pons inhibits motor neurons in the spinal cord, leading to a condition known as REMatonia, temporary muscle paralysis that prevents us from physically acting out our dreams. This paralysis is essential for safety during dreaming. Without it, people might physically move in response to dream content, leading to potential injury. Meanwhile, other areas of the brain become highly active during REM. The amygdala, which processes emotions, particularly fear and anxiety, is notably engaged. This may explain why many dreams are emotionally charged, sometimes featuring intense themes or surreal scenarios. The hippocampus, involved in memory formation, also interacts with cortical areas during REM sleep, allowing the brain to reprocess and integrate recent experiences. However, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thought, planning, and impulse control, remains relatively quiet. This imbalance contributes to the illogical and often fantastical nature of dreams, as the brain is less anchored in reality. REM sleep also plays a critical role in the consolidation of certain types of memory, particularly procedural and emotional memories. Studies using EEG and fMRI have shown that people who are deprived of REM sleep show deficits in tasks involving problem solving, emotional regulation, and creativity. When allowed to experience full REM cycles, the brain seems better equipped to reframe experiences, integrate emotional learning, and form new associations. This helps explain why, after a night of vivid dreams, individuals often wake up with a fresh perspective or deeper emotional insight. To understand why dreams occur during sleep and not while we are awake, we have to explore a fundamental feature of how the brain processes reality, the dominance of sensory input. When we're awake, our brains are in a constant state of engagement with the external environment. Visual signals from the eyes, auditory input from the ears, tactile sensations from the skin, olfactory signals from the nose, and even the subtle inner awareness of our bodily states, what scientists call interoception, are being continuously transmitted to the brain. So these streams of information converge primarily in the thalamus, which acts as a relay center, forwarding sensory data to the appropriate areas of the cerebral cortex for processing and interpretation. This sensory barrage is relentless and deeply prioritized. In fact, the brain is wired to treat external input as more urgent and more important than internal thoughts or simulations. This makes evolutionary sense. When we're awake, the brain's primary goal is to help us survive, navigate, and respond effectively to our environment. That requires constant attention to sights, sounds, and physical sensations that could signal threats or opportunities. As a result, the brain's attentional networks, particularly in the prefrontal and parietal regions, are locked onto the external world, leaving very little room for the spontaneous generation of internally driven narratives like dreams. Even during moments of daydreaming or imaginative thinking while awake, the brain's sensory systems are still on standby, ready to shift focus instantly to any environmental change. You might be deep in thought, and suddenly a sound or flash of light instantly redirects your attention. This highlights how vigilant the waking brain is to external sensory events. The systems responsible for maintaining this readiness, especially the reticular activating system in the brainstem, are active during wakefulness and serve as the gatekeepers of conscious attention. This system ensures that incoming sensory information is prioritized, keeping you anchored in the present moment. But all of that changes when you fall asleep. As the brain enters the early stages of sleep, one of the first major shifts is the active suppression of incoming sensory information. The thalamus, which relays nearly all sensory input to the cortex during wakefulness, begins to inhibit this traffic. It stops forwarding most of the external data it receives, effectively closing the gates between the outer world and conscious brain. This functional disconnect is what allows the brain to shift from processing external events to focusing on internal processes, such as memory consolidation, emotional integration, and dreaming. This suppression of sensory input is essential. If the brain continued to prioritize environmental data during sleep, it would remain in a reactive mode, never fully turning inward. Dreaming, particularly the kind that occurs during REM sleep, requires the brain to be free from the constraints of external perception. This allows internally generated signals, like those arising from memory networks, emotional centers, and associative thinking pathways, to become the dominant force shaping experience. Without the suppression of sensory input, dreams would be fragmented or overridden by real-world stimuli. There's also a neurochemical dimension to this process. During wakefulness, neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and serotonin maintain cortical arousal and facilitate rapid response to sensory changes. But during sleep, especially REM sleep, the levels of these neurotransmitters drop significantly. This biochemical shift helps desensitize the brain to the external environment and increases the influence of internally driven neural circuit. At the same time, areas like the occipital cortex and the amygdala light up with activity, as if the brain is staging its own reality, separate from what the body is physically experiencing. Dreams are often seen as random or strange mental events, but neuroscience reveals a much deeper function. They are essential tools for emotional regulation and memory process. During sleep, especially in REM stages, the brain is not simply resting or shutting off. It is highly active in sorting, integrating, and emotionally calibrating experiences from the waking state. This is one of the most important discoveries in the modern study of sleep and dreaming, that dreams serve as a built-in mechanism for mental and emotional health. When we go through experiences during the day, our brains record those events, especially if they carry emotional significance. The hippocampus, a key region involved in forming and retrieving memories, encodes these events temporarily. But for those memories to become long-term and meaningfully integrated, they must be processed and distributed across the neocortex. Much of that processing occurs during sleep, and it appears that dreaming, particularly in REM sleep, is the time when the emotional charge of these memories is reevaluated and restructured. Neuroscientific studies using brain imaging technologies like fMRI have shown that during REM sleep, the amygdala, the part of the brain heavily involved in emotion, particularly fear and anxiety, is highly active. Interestingly, at the same time, the levels of norepinephrine, a stress-related neuromodulator, are very low. This unique combination allows the brain to re-experience emotionally charged memories in a sort of safe, chemically buffered environment. Essentially, the brain can revisit difficult or emotional content without the same intensity of the physiological stress it would produce while awake. This gives the brain the opportunity to decouple the emotional response from the factual memory. That's why someone might wake up from a dream involving a past traumatic or emotional event and feel a shift in their perspective or a sense of relief. It's as if the emotional volume has been turned down, while the narrative memory remains intact. This supports the idea that dreams allow for what scientists call emotional uncharging or emotional recalibration, making them vital for psychological resilience. In parallel to this emotional function, dreams also contribute to memory consolidation. There are different types of memory: declarative memory for facts and knowledge, procedural memory for skills and habits, and emotional memory related to personal experiences, and REM sleep plays a significant role in all of them. During REM, the brain rehearses and strengthens neural connections that were formed during the day. This process is sometimes referred to as offline learning. For example, people who learn a complex motor task, like playing a piano piece or performing a sequence of movements, show improved performance after a night of sleep, particularly when REM cycles are preserved. What's fascinating is that the dreaming brain doesn't just replay memories as they were. Instead, it reconfigures them, linking fragments of past events, thoughts, and feelings into new associations. This explains why dreams often feel surreal or symbolic. They reflect the brain's attempt to form novel connections between disparate pieces of information. This process, by breaking the rigid structure of linear, logical thinking, dreams create a cognitive landscape where innovation becomes possible. Furthermore, dreams may help in future planning. Studies have shown that dreaming can simulate potential threats or challenges and allow the brain to rehearse responses. This predictive modeling function, drawing from past experiences, emotional tones, and current concerns, can help the brain prepare for uncertainty and build adaptive strategies. It's a form of overnight therapy and training combined. One of the most compelling frameworks in modern neuroscience is the idea that the brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. Rather than passively reacting to the world, the brain is constantly simulating future outcomes based on past experiences and current inputs. This predictive function is not limited to the waking state. In fact, it becomes even more pronounced during sleep, particularly in dreams. When we dream, the brain creates internally generated simulations that can serve as rehearsals, stress tests, and training environments for survival and adaptation. From an evolutionary perspective, dreaming may have emerged as a biological tool to run simulations of potential threats, challenges, and social dynamics in a safe offline environment. The mechanism is surprisingly sophisticated. During REM sleep, the brain draws from the hippocampus, which stores episodic memories, and the amygdala, which attaches emotional weight to those memories. Simultaneously, cortical areas responsible for imagery and narrative construction become activated. This integration allows the brain to recreate past scenarios or generate entirely novel ones that mirror real-life challenges. The dreamer, while immobilized in rematonia, is mentally immersed in an experience that feels real but poses no physical risk. This ability to simulate experience without danger is biologically powerful. It gives the brain a low-cost way to refine behavioral responses and emotional reactions. For instance, a person may have a dream about being chased, navigating a complex social interaction, or confronting a moral dilemma. These themes are not arbitrary. They are deeply rooted in the types of experiences that have historically carried high stakes for human survival. By rehearsing such scenarios in dreams, the brain enhances its readiness to respond adaptively when similar challenges arise during waking life. Neuroscientific evidence supports this function of dreams as simulations. A functional brain imaging during REM sleep shows significant activity in regions involved in motor planning, even though no actual movement occurs. This suggests that the brain is preparing for actions it cannot physically execute during sleep. These rehearsals are more than just passive reenactments. They are dynamic, emotionally infused, and contextually rich. They allow the brain to explore different strategies, predict potential outcomes, and evaluate risks, all without exposure to real-world consequences. Children, for example, tend to spend more time in REM sleep than adults. This makes sense when viewed through the lens of neurodevelopment and learning. The developing brain requires more simulations as it builds models of the world and learns how to navigate it. Dreams in this context are not just reflections of experience, but active contributions to the construction of a cognitive framework for understanding the environment and predicting how to behave within it. Even in adults, the predictive nature of dreaming continues to support cognitive and emotional flexibility. Individuals who experience recurrent dreams about certain themes often report improvements in their ability to handle those challenges in real life. For example, someone who repeatedly dreams about public speaking may eventually become less anxious about it in waking life. This is not merely exposure through thought. It is a form of embodied rehearsal where the emotional and cognitive systems of the brain are engaged in stress inoculation. One of the most powerful attributes of the human brain is its plasticity, its ability to change, rewire, and adapt throughout life. This plasticity is not limited to conscious learning or physical experiences. It is deeply influenced by what occurs during sleep, particularly within dreams. Neuroscience has revealed that dreaming plays a critical role in unlocking and enhancing the brain's capacity for creative thinking and complex problem solving. Far from being random or purely symbolic, dreams are biologically functional events that allow the brain to experiment with new ideas, forge unexpected connections, and test out solutions that would be impossible to fully explore during waking consciousness. During REM sleep, when the most vivid dreaming typically occurs, the brain enters a unique neurochemical state. Levels of serotonin and norepinephrine, neurotransmitters associated with focused attention and threat detection, drop significantly. In contrast, acetylcholine levels rise. This neurochemical profile creates a mental environment that is free from the constraints of linear logic and inhibition, while still maintaining high internal activation and vivid imagery. In this state, the brain is unusually permissive to making connections between ideas that, during wakefulness, would not seem obviously related. This allows for what neuroscientists refer to as associative thinking, the foundation of insight, innovation, and creative problem solving. Numerous historical accounts support this scientific understanding. Some of the most famous creative breakthroughs in science, mathematics, and the arts have been credited to dreams. Dmitri Mendeleev, the creator of the periodic table, reported that the final layout of elements came to him in a dream. Paul McCartney famously said, "The melody for yesterday arrived fully formed during sleep." These are not isolated anecdotes. They reflect a larger truth about the dreaming brain's ability to recombine elements of memory and perception into something novel and valuable. This capacity is deeply tied to neuroplasticity. During the day, as we gather experiences, the brain encodes those experiences into temporary neural traces. But it is during sleep that those traces are either strengthened, pruned, or reorganized. This reorganization is not purely based on efficiency. It is also about flexibility. Dreams allow the brain to try out new configurations of thought without the fear of failure or social judgment. This safe exploration is biologically necessary for adapting to new situations and generating creative responses to uncertainty. In other words, dreams act as a sandbox for the brain's adaptive capacity, stretching and testing the limits of what is possible. Studies using EEG and brain imaging during sleep have shown that the prefrontal cortex, which governs executive control and critical judgment, is less active during dreaming. Meanwhile, the visual cortex, motor areas, limbic system, and default mode network become highly active. This shift in brain activity supports a more fluid, less censored mode of thinking. It's as if the brain gives itself permission to explore without boundaries. This explains why dreams often feel surreal or illogical while simultaneously offering powerful insights when interpreted through reflection. The brain, freed from constraints, can explore imaginative scenarios that fuel later innovation and problem resolution. So when we ask, why do dreams come when we sleep? We're really uncovering one of the most elegant functions of the human brain. Dreams are not random nor meaningless. They are a biologically intelligent feature of how the brain organizes, heals, predicts, and innovates. While we sleep, especially during REM, the brain runs complex simulations, processes emotional experiences, unpacks memories, refines future strategies, and even crafts new ideas. It is a system built for growth and survival, doing its deepest work while we lie still and unaware. Understanding this reframes sleep and dreaming, not as downtime, but as one of the most productive, transformative states we can enter. The dreaming brain is doing essential life-optimizing work, sculpting a stronger, wiser, and more capable version of ourselves night after night, completely behind the scenes, yet with effects that shape every part of our waking existence.